So we are continuing in Romans chapter 2. We'll jump right in this morning we'll start at verse 21. Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhors idols, dost thou commit sacrilege? Thou that makest thy boast of the law, through breaking the law dishonorest thou God? For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. Why is Paul going through this list of things that he is saying, you say this, you shouldn't commit adultery, and then you commit adultery, and he goes down through a list of sins here. What's his point? What's his reasoning in saying this?
It seemed though in the first century there was a lot of hypocrisy among the Jews, that they would accuse others of the things that they themselves were doing.
Okay, a lot of hypocrisy. And in verse 21, when he says, Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? So they could see, the Jews could see the difference between right and wrong. That's why they were telling these others that what they were doing was wrong. And he just goes through a list, and then he says, For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. And he's saying, you know you aren't supposed to do this, and you're blaspheming God's name. The Gentiles see that you're hypocrites. Thinkest thou not that thou that judgest them which do such things, and does them the same, thou shalt escape the judgment of God? The Jews were quick to condemn the Gentiles for sins, yet were guilty of the same things. And we cannot escape the judgment of God because we are able to point out the sins in the lives of others. So a lot of times we may reason, well, God's not going to condemn me because this person over here is worse than I am. And is that going to get us into heaven by saying this person is worse than I am? No. It's not going to work. But they were guilty of it. We're guilty of it today. In Ecclesiastes 12, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. So what should be our number one priority, our aim in life? To do good. And according to Ecclesiastes, what does he say? Fear God and keep his commandments. Do we think that way? A lot of times we don't. We think, what am I going to get out of this? Or how will this benefit me? Or I like doing this. The whole conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Does that scare anybody here? It should scare us all. Because again, nothing is going to be hidden from God. We can hide things from one another, but everything is going to be brought into judgment by God. So through breaking the law, dishonorest thou God? We honor or dishonor God by the way we treat his law. It's plain and simple. We honor or dishonor him by the way he treats his law. And I was having a discussion with someone the other day, and I said, yeah, a lot of people consider me legalistic, but what is the Bible? It's a law book. an Old Testament, an Old Covenant, a New Testament, a New Covenant. Jesus talked about people doing things without authority, without law, working iniquity. So we dishonor or honor God by the way we treat his law. John 14:15, Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." So if we keep his commandments, does that mean that we love him?
Yes. We keep his commandments.
If we keep his commandments, does that mean that we love him?
If we do that, it means that we love him. Because he tells us
Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean that we love him, because we can come here, we can sing a song, have our mind focused on what we're doing this afternoon. We can take the Lord's Supper. We can show up. We can go through the motions, but going through the motions, we have it backwards. If we love God, then we're going to do everything that he says. We're going to do everything. And what else can I do, Lord? David and then Nat.
I was thinking of this one, that if we had our minds like that, which is it's common for us to have those, like, where we're distracted by things like that, then pull our mind back. But if we were just going through the motions, we wouldn't be keeping his commandments in the first place. You know, we wouldn't be loving him with all of our heart or soul or mind and strength. And I was thinking of Paul when he's talked about here in Romans. Are you a hypocrite? Essentially, was what he asking. I think it was Paul. Later, he was talking about, should I teach to others, and then fall short myself. I'm paraphrasing. Kind of things that others would be saying, but I wouldn't. You know what I mean? When I have the truth and I'm teaching others, then I act a hypocrite. That's kind of the warning that we can see.
Okay, Nat.
if we don't come here of free will, then there's no use at all in us coming. We come because we know God made everything. He made us, and we realize that. We realize he is the supreme being, and that's who we need to put our trust in, and fear him and keep his commandments. And one of his commandments is that I put him first.
Right.
And so, if I come here with the wrong attitude, not here because I love him, God forbid me coming. He already knows that. He knows whether I care for him or not. But one of my obligations is to do it of a free will.
Right. And when we recognize who God is, the only acceptable response to recognizing God is falling down and worshiping him. And again, like you say, it's out of our free will. Because if we think, I gotta go, I have to do this, we need the attitude, it's a privilege. It's a privilege. God saved me. He rescued me. He sent his son to die for me. And it's a privilege for me to be able to do what he says. Carol?
I'm just in agreement.
You were what?
I'm just in agreement.
Oh, okay.
My thought was the Jews it was being pointed out that they could keep all the commandments, but they were missing
Right.
the love and that right attitude.
Jesus talked to the Jews so much, the Pharisees, and he would say in so many of the sentences, hypocrites. They were doing the things, you honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. And if our heart isn't in what we're doing, we are far from God, and we aren't worshiping in spirit and in truth.
I was saying they didn't have love in their hearts. They were playing politics most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
They would just do the thing that they needed to do to stay in power.
Right. John 15:14, you are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Luke 6:46, and why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? And I like that verse, and I have to remember to apply it to myself too. Why are you calling Jesus Lord, your Lord, but you don't want to submit to him and do what he says? So he said, as it is written, reference to as it is written in verse 24 is an allusion to Isaiah 52, Ezekiel 36. The dishonor done to God arose from their greed of gain, their deceit, their hypocrisy, which were fully known to the Gentiles among whom they lived. So again, others can see in us a lot of times what we can't see in ourselves, and the Gentiles could see in the Jews that they were hypocrites, they were greedy, they were deceitful, and that was the reputation the Jews had. So Paul weaves this prophetic rebuke into the tissue of his own language, but by the as it is written, he reminds his readers that he is adapting it from their own inspired scriptures. So these Jews knew how to quote scripture. They didn't know how to live it because their heart was far from God, but they would say, as it is written, we're doing this and we're doing that. And Paul uses as it is written to refer back to Isaiah and Ezekiel. So, thus far, Paul has shown that the Jew is a sinner like the Gentiles. The next step will be to drive him from his refuge in the rite of circumcision. This was the outward mark which distinguished him from the heathen neighbor and showed him to be a descendant of Abraham. Just as a side note, circumcision was a sign of the covenant, and what is one thing that is common in every covenant that you can read about in the Bible? When a covenant was made between man and God, what was common? What did there have to be? Blood, the shedding of blood. You go back to the flood, and God made a covenant with Noah that he wouldn't destroy the world again. There is a sacrifice that was made. You look at the Old Testament and the laws on marriage, and it talks about the marriage cloth, and if a man thought that or had proof that his wife was not a virgin, he could send her away. When you come to the New Testament and Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper, what does he say? This is my blood of the new covenant. So covenants were always ratified with blood, which included this act of circumcision, where there would have been blood involved in that. For circumcision verily profits if you keep the law, but if you be a breaker of the law, your circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not this uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge you, who by the letter and circumcision does transgress the law? Does this sound like a riddle? It's Nat.
What I'm going to say here is something that Janice and I watched the other day, and it shows this gentleman. Now I know this is, but the truth in what we're talking about, you've seen in what he did. He was sick in the bed. He was down, dying, and they were trying to help him, of course. But he could see the church building from where he was. And so on Sunday, he gets up, and they're trying to get him to lay back down, because he's not, they're thinking, oh, you don't have the strength to get up. He gets dressed. He will not let nobody help him do anything. He dresses himself. He does everything by himself. He gets his cane, and he walks up that hill to that church building. And they're going along with know, I come to worship my God, is what he said to them. And he tells them this. And that's what he does. And he tells them on the way, he said, I'm going to die today, but I'm going to worship my God. And so he goes through that. And he is going because he loves God. That's
Right.
what he's going for. So as I watched that, I thought, how many people would watch this and realize what this man is doing? And it's what we're talking about. He went to worship God that made him and give him everything he had, even though,
Right.
and he walks back.
Okay. So how, with what I just read here, like I say, it sounds like a riddle, but how, and this is number 18 on the questions, how could a Jew's circumcision be made uncircumcision, and how describing the outward Jew and the inward Jew? How does that fit in with what we just read here? Ryan?
It's switching to only you're going to get judged by your heart. So if you break the law, even in your heart you break the law, that becomes uncircumcision. You're outside of his kingdom. And just like Ray says, if the uncircumcision follow the law, should they not be counted for circumcision? Meaning you're going to get judged by your heart, what's inside.
Okay, so just to clarify the first comment that you made, how are we judged?
By your heart.
Okay, you want to?
I don't remember my first comment.
I thought you said we're judged only by our heart.
We're judged by what we do.
Okay,
We do what we say.
we're judged by what we do, but we can't do it out of rote. It has to come from the heart. So we're judged by our heart, but it's not our heart only, or anybody could do anything and they would feel justified.
I think it was that's the spirit and truth thing. So he's, like Brian is saying, he's defined that they believed, once I'm circumcised, I'm good. It's just like somebody who would believe, once I'm baptized, I can do whatever, I'm good. You know what I mean? They believed that it was the action of doing the thing itself that saved them, not the committed part, is what Brian was saying, that he's making the analogy here that it's spirit and truth.
It's both, not one or the other. So coming back to these verses we just read here, how could a Jew's circumcision be made uncircumcision? Jim?
By not keeping the New Testament law.
But
I mean, that's the reason. I mean, that they boasted that circumcision was to be made.
okay, and it wouldn't have been the New Testament law when he said this, because it hadn't gone into effect, but by just keeping the law period. They had this physical act performed, and then we'll see later as Paul talks about the circumcision of the heart, they hadn't cut the sin out of their heart. So they had the outward sign, but not the heart with it. Yeah.
The only way that I'm going to know how to do anything is to get into God's Word. I do not know. It's like obeying God. What do I know about the gospel before I obey it? Nothing. The only way I learn is just exactly like God tells me. Don't add to my word or don't take from it. I have got to get in there and search it out for myself.
Right.
And I've got to do what he tells me to do.
Right. And so again, we have to follow God's word from the heart, but if we go through the outward motions, and the outward motions today, instead of talking about circumcision, people could say, well, you got to go through 5 acts to become a Christian and 5 acts to worship. And I heard long time ago, where does something like that come from? So what I read was like back in the 1800s, when a lot of people didn't have much more than a 6th grade education, this was brought out to teach people that didn't know how to read. So it made it easy for people to understand what they needed to do to be saved and how to worship God. That makes sense. But you look at today, the year 2025, just about everybody can read for themselves, and like Nat just said, we have to read and study for ourselves, yet we want to stay back with this simple level of understanding. The simple level of understanding. And we have a Bible that we can read every day to know the heart of God and to know what He's done for us and to know what we need to do for Him. So, and shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter and circumcision does transgress the law? So what is Paul saying here in these verses about the Gentile and circumcision?
Of the heart.
Ryan?
Saying that Gentiles are judging the Jews breaking the law.
They're what?
Gentiles are obeying the law, and they're judging the Jews that are breaking the law.
Okay, so there's two things there. The Gentiles are obeying the law and judging the Jews that are breaking the law, and the Gentiles are in a way better than the Jews, even though the Jews have the physical act of being circumcised as a sign, because the Gentiles, and not all Gentiles, but he's talking about the ones that want to please God, they want to please God. They want to serve God.
I was thinking with Paul's writing, he takes a lot of the same beats that Jesus was when he was in his ministry, that keeping the law was a good thing. The problem was their hearts needed to be taken down a peg, that you are no better than these Gentiles that you're accusing of being barbarians or heathens or whatever you would accuse them of. You're no better. All sin and fall short. That's what we'll get to in the next one. And then later in the book, he gets into God can graft in and out the Jews or the Gentiles, right? He can do whatever. This is not, you don't have some special position that you get to defy the law, and that's what he's getting at.
Let me get Jim, and then I want to comment on what you said, if I remember what you said. Jim?
What law were the Jews trying to keep here in this chapter?
Well, what law was in effect?
A New Testament
When did the New Testament law go into effect?
in Acts chapter 2.
Okay. So say the question.
I want to know which law the Jews were.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, these Jews were under the New Testament law had gone into effect. Yeah, I see. I agree with you. Okay, so back to your point about what did Jesus say when they would say we're of Abraham's seed?
Yeah.
What did Jesus say?
Before Abraham was, I am. He would tell them, they would be like, we've never been in bondage before, and they would say all these things.
And I was thinking when he said, God could raise up seed from rocks.
Seed from rocks, yeah, exactly.
From rocks. Okay. For circumcision profits little if you keep the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? Shall not uncircumcision, which by its nature, if it fulfill the law, judge you, who by the letter and circumcision does transgress the law? For circumcision verily profiteth if thou keep the law. Circumcision was first given to Abraham as a token or sign of the covenant between God and himself, and was later made a part of the law of Moses. But the token was worthless without the keeping of the covenant. So the token was no good if one did not honor the covenant. If one was going to bind circumcision, then he would have been obligated to keep the whole law. So the Jews were trying to keep the parts of the old law they wanted to, even though they were under a new law. So Paul, writing in Galatians 5, says, "Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he is a debtor to do the whole law. Christ is become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, you are fallen from grace." Okay, so which law here would they have been trying to be justified by?
The whole law.
The old law, going back to the old law. And he says if you try to do that, you're fallen from grace. If the Jew chose to break the law, then he was acting as if there was no covenant relationship with God. Therefore, his circumcision became uncircumcision. One could not keep the law without being circumcised, but one could be circumcised and not keep the law. So that's, you see the parallel with what we said earlier? One could not keep the law without being circumcised, but one could be circumcised and not keep the law. The Jews could have been circumcised and then they broke the Sabbath, they committed adultery, they coveted after this, they had idols, things like that. So that act did not guarantee they were going to be saved. Just like baptism doesn't guarantee we're going to be saved.
And as I was thinking about that earlier, I had a good discussion with a gentleman one time, and when I was talking about baptism, he was taking it from a perspective of like, oh, you put your faith in baptism, like a Baptist, just the dunking of the water. And the conversation was more, no, we put our faith in Christ, and Christ told us, through His Word that we need to do this, and so we take the whole of the gospel. But there's many that would look at baptism is all you gotta do. You just get them wet, and then they're saved. Get their souls saved.
Why do you think people believe that? And I agree with you, but why do you think some people believe that? It's easy. Jim?
They get around instead of not serving the Lord,
They get around not serving the Lord.
doing what He wants them to do.
They let me be baptized, and then they go their way. And I think again, some of it, there's been an influence, not since 600, but back in the Old Testament, of people just following rites and rituals. And then like with the birth of the Catholic Church and these rituals that you go through, and people, you can go through rituals and again your heart isn't in it at all, and people think all you have to do is be baptized. So God knows of no one physical act that once performed would keep a man in His good graces regardless of how that individual lived. The Jews thought that just because they were Abraham's seed physically and were circumcised, they were saved regardless of how they lived. So the doctrine of once saved, always saved, that gives comfort to a lot of people. What's it going to give them? It's going to cause them to lose their soul. Jim?
I had a person one time when I worked at the shop tell me he was drinking, and I knew he wasn't a Christian. He said God would pull him out of that bar before it was too late for him to repent, So where'd you get that at? I said, where'd you read that at?
And that's back to like what Nat said earlier. The only way we can know what God wants us to do or know anything about God is by what we can read in His Word. And whenever somebody brings something up, we need to ask them, like Jim just did, in our own way, well, that's an interesting statement. Where can I read about that in the Bible? To get people to go back to the Bible. But so many people they stake their soul on what they feel or what some man told them, and they'll risk their soul just because this person or that person, and there may be an emotional connection with the person. Well, they aren't going to tell me something that's going to be wrong. Well, they may be unaware of the truth also.
Bruce,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and maybe I shouldn't do it, but I'm thinking back to Acts 15, where they were, the people of the old law told them, unless you be circumcised, you can't be saved. And,
Mhm.
Paul and Barnabas go into that through that whole chapter, and they point out, except that you obey the gospel, but I'm taking it a little different than they're saying it.
Right.
You're nowhere,
Right.
So what we're talking about here, it's the same thing, that we're dealing with. It's amazing at the things we see. We can go back and read a whole lot about it.
Right. So back to the covenant of circumcision, Genesis 17, and God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and thy seed and after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. And you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you. Every man child in your generations, he that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, this is back in Romans 2, for he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart and the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. So he's saying it was a commandment, it was a sign of the covenant to be circumcised, but that's not the sum total of being a Jew. If you're going to be a Jew, you have to do what God tells you to do. But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart. So in Acts chapter 2, when Peter was preaching, what does it say about the men? They were cut to the heart. They were cut to the heart. He is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart. These Jews on the day of Pentecost, when the gospel was preached, and they were shown from the Old Testament that Christ was the fulfillment, the Messiah, they had that circumcision of the heart. And what did they say? What shall we do to be saved? They cried out. They didn't wait for somebody to tell them. Their heart was touched, their heart was cut, their heart was circumcised. They wanted to obey God. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? So, if the Gentiles kept the law, why shouldn't they be considered the friend of God? Thus, in fellowship with God, some Gentiles lived better lives than some Jews. Fleshly circumcision alone was insufficient. So then, if the Gentiles by nature or practice did what God wanted, then this ought to be counted as pleasing to God. Not only were the Gentiles pleasing to God, but it condemned the Jews for not doing the same. The Jews had greater opportunities, therefore they should have lived better. Who by the letter and circumcision does transgress the law? They had the written law and the token of the covenant, but continued to violate the law of God. To God, an honest-hearted Gentile was better than a corrupt-hearted Jew, for he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. This reminds me, one of my older brothers, he used to say and talk about people, he'd say, Bruce, they think they have special written across their forehead. They think they're special. And that's what a lot of the Jews, they thought they were special because they were Abraham's seed and had been circumcised when they were 8 days old. So they had their inheritance waiting for them with God.
So I was thinking the Jewish economy of the Old Testament, right? The agreement that God had with the Jews, it was rightfully, because God made it that way, based upon the circumcision and their nationality, right? So there was a blood component of it. The problem was they were carrying that into the New Testament, not understanding what the purpose of that was. The purpose of it was to bring Christ, right? So there would be the lineage of Christ to be brought into the world. And God was using the people of the Jews to do that, to be his special people for that purpose. And they reject Christ. And then they want to hold on to, no, we have a nationality kind of identity that we are, like you said, special. We have a special relationship with God because of our blood. We have a special relationship with God because of circumcision, an outward act, right? Not realizing the whole purpose was for Christ to come into the world, that all men could then be saved.
So, do you know kind of what you would call that covenant, the terminology for that? That's I believe, if I get this right, that's a unilateral covenant from a higher authority to a lower authority. And unilateral means that superior authority sets the conditions, and that's it. There's no discussion. So you have, what did I just say that was? Unilateral, and then what's the other kind of covenant? Bilateral, back and forth between two parties. So you would see these, I don't know if this is still how unions work or some organizations in the workplace, but some there would be contracts where this is it, take it or leave it. It goes from the top down to the bottom, and either you accept it or you don't. And that was the way it was with the Jews. And that's the way it is in the New Testament too. But man comes up with, well, I think we ought to do this, I think we ought to change that, and you have this back and forth. That's okay in a man's covenant, in a contract. You're going into business with somebody. I want this many shares, I want this, I want that. You can do that, but with God, it's a unilateral from a superior being to an inferior being. He speaks, we listen, we do. Now,
We still deal with this situation today. I work with people that would tell you you had to be circumcised. Well, you know you can go to 2 Corinthians 3, and you can point out that you don't need to be, and it tells you that people are still that way. They still live under the Mosaic law. That's what it's going to tell you.
they live under the parts they want to.
Yes.
But they,
you know what I'm saying.
yeah, but they won't go out and offer sacrifices. They pick and choose.
Yeah, but there's one verse here all they need to read.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can read a couple before that, but if you read 15, he says, but even unto this day, when Moses is read, the veil is upon their heart. Then he gives you, nevertheless, when it shall turn to the Lord, the veil shall be taken away.
Right.
And you know what else is in there that you can read. I don't know, you know.
Right. So he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly. Christians are spiritual Jews. We must become Abraham's seed in order to be saved. Galatians 3:27-29. For as many of you as been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you be Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. The Christian is not circumcised of the flesh, but of the heart. And this we learn from Colossians. God is the one that does this operation. In whom ye are circumcised with circumcision made without hands, and putting off the body of sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, wherein also ye are risen with him through faith of the operation of God, who has raised him from the dead. So we see here, like medical terms, there's this operation that takes place. God is the one that is doing the operation. He's putting off the body of sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism. Again, that blood that is involved in this covenant. Circumcision of the heart is cutting off the evil desires and stubborn will of the heart. So with physical circumcision, how many times is it done? Once. How many times do we have to circumcise our heart? All the time, over and over and over and over. Circumcision of the heart is cutting off the evil desires and stubborn will of the heart. And again, some people will think, well, I've been baptized, I received that spiritual circumcision. Well, if we keep on sinning, then we haven't cut off those evil desires of the heart. Acts 7:51, ye stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart. So Stephen is calling these Jews, they were physically circumcised. He's calling them uncircumcised in heart because they hadn't cut the evil desires off of their heart. Ye stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you do always resist the Holy Ghost, as your fathers did, so do ye. Which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them from which showed before the coming of the just one, whom you have been now the betrayers and murderers of. So Stephen is pointing out in language similar to what Christ uses, and Paul, stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. Many in fleshly Israel sought their praise from men. Matthew 6, verse 1, take heed that you do not do your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their own reward. But when you do your alms, let not your left hand know what your right hand does, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which sees in himself shall reward thee openly. And when you pray, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say to you, they have their own reward. Everything that the Jews were doing, Jesus is pointing out to them, or the Pharisees, it was to be seen of men. In John 12:42-43, nevertheless among the chief rulers also many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. So they were doing the physical outward things that they were supposed to be doing, praying, giving their alms, but they had not circumcised their heart, and they were doing these things to be seen of men, not to be pleasing to God. And in John 12, they did not, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. So the Pharisees were keeping people out of the kingdom because of what they were doing.
I was thinking, so we can very easily see, because we have the whole account, the things in which the Jews fell short, but then the application for me in my life is that I can fall into the same thing if I'm not careful, that my heart can be wrong. And I was thinking about like the prosperity doctrine that there's a lot of denominations will get into. If you live a Christian life, you're going to have abundance and that kind of thing. And so that life that they're trying to promote is get money by doing this, not please God. It's for the wrong motive, and that's what they were doing.
And they were worshiping their god, money, and whatever, in the name of religion. Okay, we're out of time. We'll look at maybe a couple questions we haven't covered on chapter 2, and then we will go ahead and get into chapter 3 next week. And I thank you for your comments. That's still going, right? Yeah, sure.